Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen. And we've been talking about the currency swapping that's been going off across the board outside of the world reserve currency, US dollar. There's definitely a push towards the SDR at the IMF. They're going off the original SWIFT system. There's a lot of countries trading outside of the US dollar, and as this article out of CNBC says, China will compel Saudi Arabia to trade oil in yuan, and that's going to affect the US dollar. And as the article goes into, China will compel Saudi Arabia to trade oil in yuan. And when this happens, the rest of the oil market will follow suit and abandon the US dollar as a world's reserve currency, a leading economist told CNBC on Monday. Carl Weinberg, chief economist and managing director at High Frequency Economics, said Beijing stands to become the most dominant global player in oil demand since China usurped the US as the biggest oil importer on the planet. Saudi Arabia has to pay attention to this because even as much as 1 or 2 years from now, Chinese demand will dwarf US demand, Weinberg said. And I quote, "I believe that yuan pricing of oil is coming, and as soon as the Saudis move to accept it, as the Chinese will compel them to do, then the rest of the oil market will move along with them." Crux of the petrodollar. In recent years, several nations opposed to the dollar being the world's reserve currency have progressively sought to try and abandon it. For instance, Russia and China have sought to operate in a non-dollar environment when trading oil. Both countries have also increased their efforts to mine and acquire physical gold if, or perhaps when, the dollar collapses. OPEC kingpin Saudi Arabia is at the crux of the petrodollar. Since the 1974 agreement between US President Richard Nixon and Saudi King Faisal, Saudi Arabia has accepted payments for nearly all of its oil exports in dollars. However, as China imports more and more oil from countries across the world, the idea of having to purchase that same oil in dollars has become increasingly irritable to Beijing. In recent years, China has sought to ratchet up the pressure on Saudi Arabia over the form of currency in which their oil trade is conducted, with Riyadh now enjoying less and less oil purchases from Beijing. What does it mean for the dollar? When asked what it could mean for the dollar should the oil market move oil trade out of the US currency and into the yuan, Weinberg said the world's transaction currency would suffer less demand for US securities across the board. And I quote, "Moving oil trade out of dollars into yuan will take right now between $600 billion and $800 billion worth of transactions out of the dollar. That means a stronger demand for things in China, whether it's securities or whether it's goods and services. It is a growth plus for China, and that's why they want this to happen." So going into this, there's a lot of these kinds of stories coming out. We recently reported on what happened in Russia. We've talked about a lot of this before and how China is propping itself up to become the next big superpower, gathering gold while places like Canada and Norway and others sell off their gold, getting ready for that ability to take over. They've been loaning massive amounts of money like the IMF to places in Africa to basically buy up countries in debt because obviously they can't pay it back. And then on top of that, you have the IMF talking about basing their headquarters in Beijing in the next few years, which we originally reported on, I think, early 2017, late 2016. So this is all coming to a precipice, and it's something that we've kind of, if you go back to all our videos talking about China and the United States dollar and all that kind of stuff, you see it all building up. What do you think, John?
Well, it totally does, Josh. And there's so many times where we've done videos. We did actually a video where we specifically talked about the new swaps that's out there between different countries.
A lot of them.
Yeah, a lot of them. And it's just starting to more rapidly incline this exit of the US dollar. Because what people are seeing is they're seeing the worries, which, in 2008 was kind of the first major shock to the US dollar that it should have collapsed, and there was bankers saying that if it wasn't that we saved the economy, there might not have been a US dollar, and that was kind of where they started. It's the US dollar has been on a collapsing trend because what you got to understand, a fiat currency's lifespan is usually around 35 years the average, so they're kind of on borrowed time right now, and in 2008 it should have collapsed, so that would have been about 37 years. But of course they pushed it another 10 years, and people are saying to me now, John, you're wrong. Like, this is never going to happen. They're just going to continue to prop it up. Yeah, they might continue to prop it up, but at one point, people are going to say, what about me not being able to afford food anymore or my rent anymore because of the more and more inflation getting pushed into the system? Look at what they did with the inflation. Hasn't been seen a crazy amount in the economy. It's been quite high in the regular economy, but in other markets, look at the stock markets and the real estate market. The inflation has been just through the roof, about 100% over the last 10 years. It's just utterly insane. Plus, actually, in some places, Josh, it's just continuing on this trend of just an ever increasing amount of debt getting shoved into the system to keep it alive. It's basically you're on life support, and they just continue to just pump your lungs. That is the continued shoving of debt into the economy to prop it up.
Yeah, and the false faith in the dollar cannot last forever. I mean, it's totally false, and the value isn't there. It's just based on, like the stock markets, this investor confidence, except for we're the unwilling investors and it's forced on us. And we're seeing around the world people lose faith in it. And no matter what, it has to come crashing down eventually. And we're seeing something on the precipice of that because we've reported, it feels like 1 billion stories over the last just year alone, but not to mention last many years. And we have seen it come to this precipice, like I mentioned, and you see every fiat currency eventually reverts to its true value of zero. It always has, it always will, going back to 1024 AD in China, interestingly enough, and it seems like they're always on top of this kind of stuff. So it's worth pointing out. But John, where does this lead us from here? Because we have interest rates skyrocketing. We have these huge bubbles in real estate, pensions, derivatives bubbles worldwide. I mean, it's insane. Where is this leading us?
Well, the central banks have distorted the markets completely. They literally have destroyed everything in the real economy, and everything is zombies now. There's zombies in among banks. They were the first ones. Then it spread to corporations. Now we have zombie humans, of course, because none of the humans are able to pay their debt anymore. So they just get by constantly getting more and more debt in order to keep living. The thing is, Josh, you said a key word a little bit earlier. Just you said faith. Faith is the life of a currency. When the faith disappears, it doesn't matter if it was 20 years earlier, the US dollar could have failed at that time. All that it is just a belief that you actually believe that the US dollar has value. That's what most people are still. And the problem is them believing that is hurting them, because what they're getting constantly hit with is the hidden tax of inflation. I was talking with my mom just recently about she was complaining about how much always, things goes up and everything. And I said, listen, I told you so many times about inflation. You're not getting it. Like, inflation is, I tried to explain the supply and demand scenario of, more supply than demand. And how there's a constant, supply coming in while it's still the same amount of demand. Yeah. It's just gonna take the price of things just skyrocket of the supply, which is the currency.
Yeah, and you could just keep adding zeros to those numbers, but its purchasing power will remain the same. And I mean, it comes also down a lot to that subjective value of scarcity, application, use, and demand. And the fiat currencies of the world do not have that. There's certainly no scarcity. They print amazing amounts of it, just absolutely insane. And with the fractional reserve lending and the zero reserve policies, it's just absolutely insane. And then on top of that, you have no real demand. It's faith, faulty faith, and there's no real use case except for the fact that people are still using it because they have faith. And once that domino falls, the rest comes down with it, because there's no scarcity, and scarcity is very important to value. And as long as we keep printing this faulty, faithless currency in the long run, we will continue to reap the consequences. And we've seen that through hundreds and hundreds of currencies throughout time. And as John mentioned, they have not a very long shelf life. And to be honest, I mean, I can't think of any other currency that's lasted longer than the US dollar throughout all of history.
Well, first of all, the US dollar has failed so many times just over the last 100 years, technically, right?
It's prolonged from the recession too. I mean, in 2008, it never ended. They just propped it up further. So it's like propping up a dead horse, and it gets more and more bloated, so it gets heavier, and eventually it comes down even harder. We want it to happen sooner than later.
Yeah, no, it's a constant failure of the currency because it continuously misusing the power of printing money into thin air. And then, of course, today the commercial banks are the biggest printers of money because they use the money getting created by the government through deficit spending to tenfold that into the economy. A lot of times more, as you said zero reserve policy. That's what it is. They just entrust the bank to actually do whatever reserve they want. And of course, now the banks are betting with your money all across the world. I just want to show one thing here to everybody, show you kind of an overview over the U.S. empire and what they've created with the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency. They have shoveled so much U.S. dollars overseas that they've been able to, silo in different places. So the inflation isn't as bad as it could have been if all that stayed within its borders. I'm just going to show you this pie chart here that shows the Federal Reserve holds about $2.38 trillion. And that's the Federal Reserve buying it. The European Union have been buying corporate bonds and European bonds to prop up the market. So it's basically the Fed just trying to save the economy, Josh. It's nothing else that it is. And then, of course, the U.S. government itself holds its own bonds, its own debt. So the U.S. government invested in its own debt. It's $5.73 trillion. That's
Prop it up, make you look real good.
I'm just gonna laugh at you have the government itself investing in its own debt. That is utter insanity to me.
It's like that's almost like liking your own status, right, John?
Yeah, it totally is.
Right?
I'm guilty of that. No, anyways, it's just ridiculous how this is, Josh. And then of course you get to the foreign investors, which actually holds almost more than the U.S. Than U.S. investors in general. So let's just go into and see why this push away from the U.S. dollar is happening, because everybody's seen that the U.S. dollar is losing its value. It's about to fail. And somebody's trying to find solutions to find a new monetary system. But the problem is you got the same criminals over there in China and elsewhere trying to do the same thing. It's the banksters. They are over there, and the political elite trying to create a control grid just about the same as we have today, just a new version. And then, of course, they really want a global system and a global cashless system where we could have the SDR at the top, and then all the other currencies would stay the same, so the populace doesn't really recognize it, Josh. They would just sit on mass devalued currencies that they use. Meanwhile, the corporate elites and the politicians, the governments will use the special drawing right as a trading a tool.
And of course, China is on top of that centrally planned cashless system. Very important to mention centrally planned. And I want to wrap it up, John. I want to talk a bit about solutions, because there are a lot of solutions. And, we see a lot of channels on YouTube and elsewhere talk about the problems, and it scares people. And it should, because you should be aware of the negatives to make positives. But they don't often talk about solutions. And it always comes down to food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. Gold and silver as wealth insurance protect your purchasing power. Not investment advice, our opinion, but look at history. And besides, gold and silver isn't an investment, it's wealth insurance. As they add zeros to those dollars, that gold preserves wealth. Now, on top of that, we have cryptocurrencies that have sound fundamental value. There's a few of them, and they change the world, and they are truly, if they are truly decentralized and have fundamental value, which reminds me to tell everyone, make sure to use promo code WHAM5050 for World CryptoCon in Las Vegas. Check me out there. Come and say hi. Say hi to Jeff Berwick. Say hi to Charlie Lee from Litecoin. There's so many big names that are going to be there. I believe Max Kaiser is coming back for that one. Maybe we'll get a second interview in 1 month done with Max Kaiser. We'll see. But there's lots going on there, and make sure to come and say hi. There's so many big names there, and make sure to check out the link below for that as well. But also, it's just we have to wrap it up with, you as an individual are responsible for yourself, your own due diligence, your own education. Be financially responsible and sufficient, and responsibility is a hallmark of freedom itself. It all comes down to you being self-sustainable, be independent, be decentralized, rule yourself, and live a life of rebellion just by living so free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion, as a wise man once said. All these fiat currencies will always revert to zero, and if they shove you down a bottomless pit of debt, you are forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, pushing you into perfect servitude. Don't allow it to happen. Break free, folks, and don't be dependent or a debt slave on anyone. Don't be a slave to anyone. Be your own person and rule yourself. John?
Well, talking about slave, I'm just going to end up with this and show you the last numbers here, just so people understand, what's happening with Khashoggi and all this stuff in the news. Well, here's one chart for you that is telling you why nobody's doing anything about Saudi Arabia, especially in the United States, because they're a slave to the Saudis, because the Saudis holds about 140 to 150 billion dollars worth of U.S. bonds. Now that could collapse the U.S. economy, just that going onto the market. Well, what could this list do? Look at China, 1.18 trillion. Japan, 1.03 trillion, or Brazil, Ireland, UK, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Cayman Islands, and Hong Kong. It's interesting with Cayman Islands. We all know what's going on there with the Bank of, with the City of London and their intermediaries. But anyways, it's just, we are debt slaves, and the United States are a slave to all these people that they've given their debt to, because they could be crushed in an instant when any of these guys loses the faith and drops the US dollars, actually drops the US dollars by selling their US treasuries.
When the you-know-what hits a fan, folks, we've heard that saying before, and
when the U.S. bonds hit the fan.
Yeah, it's actually worse than the original. Yeah, it's true. So we will wrap it up there. I'm going to be in Las Vegas soon. John and I are going to try and get a few more videos done after this before I go, but I'm leaving in a couple days, and I'll be gone for a little while, but we're going to be doing lots of videos either way. Over the internet. Let's hope that technology works out for us. Yeah. I know he's stuck up here in the cold north, but okay. I feel for him. He'll be down there soon. We're also going to be doing some work together in Las Vegas in December as well, I believe, beginning of December. So lots to look forward to, and I got a lot of big interviews on the way. So stay tuned. Also check out John at The Economic Truth on Steemit, and we will be back at you with much more. The Saudi Arabia stuff is too much to keep up with. I've been trying to keep up with it every day, something happening.
Yeah, but it's that one chart that tells you. I just posted it yesterday, and it's so obvious. That's why nothing is happening, guys.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see the Clinton Foundation, their work with the Saudis, Trudeau Foundation, all these people, and I mean, let's face it, Trump as well. It's like
about those Ponzi schemes that you give money to that use it for to go traveling. Oh, it's actually a foundation that's supposed to help people. No, of course they use all that money themselves.
And you see like Trump with his hand on that crystal ball and everything in Saudi Arabia and like dancing with like what was that?
That is like so insane. Like these guys are nuts. I don't know what even to say about like why would people? It's like oh Trump, we love you. It's insane. Why would you worship any of your leaders that are just enslaving you more? It's utter insanity.
No matter who's in office.
Yeah,
the deep state continues.
The deep state continues, and the banksters are always there. It's so funny. After Trump got in power, very little people starting to come after the banksters that are the number one threat to the U.S. economy. They are the deep state behind the deep state. Yeah. Listen. Do it. Go after those banksters. That's who we really have a problem with, not some kind of Obama holdovers. It's just stupid. Come on.
Yeah, let's get over this obsession with leaders and be voluntary free individuals, independent of these organized crime rackets that we call government and banks and central banks, etc. So anyway, to wrap it up,
done.
Thanks for going into this with us, John. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from... Well, I guess Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. I almost messed up there. Find the truth, be the change. You think I've done this enough times?
Yeah, that's okay.
Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored on YouTube. As these guys come in and flag all of our content, as hate speech. Also, check out our Bitcoin address below as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out at steemit.com. We're at Josh Sigurdson. It's a future of social media where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency. Steem, that is. So make sure to check us out there. Make sure to join us at Anarchapulco 2019 with people like Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, of course, Jeff Berwick, Vid Jedlicka. So many incredible speakers are going to be speaking. It's just a massively growing event. It is something you have to see to believe. So make sure to check it out below and save money on your tickets by using promo code WAM, that's WAM, and I hope to see you there. Also, check out our newsletter as we are getting demonetized and censored and all that. We don't know what comes next, so we have an email, worldalternativemedia@gmail.com. Send us an email with subject line YES, YES, and we will include you in the newsletter where we will continuously keep you updated. So until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.